Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about the film Invisible Ghost, which is an American horror film produced in 1941 starring Bela Lugosi. Lugosi plays the role of Dr. Kessler, who was a wealthy man with a good reputation, but who had a trauma in his life. His wife, some years before, had left him for another man, and a short time later, she passed away in a car accident. However, what Dr. Kessler didn't know is that his wife was actually alive. She was brain damaged, badly hurt, but she was still alive. And for any weird reason, his own gardener, in secret, kept his wife alive in the basement of his house. It's not known why the gardener hid his wife this way, but it seems that he did that because he was afraid of Dr. Kessler's reaction to know if his wife was still alive. Maybe he could be too enraged, too depressed, and so on. However, sometimes, always in the night, his wife left the basement and showed up to Dr. Kessler in the window. And whenever it occurs, Dr. Kessler had homicidal impulses that he couldn't really control. Dr. Kessler shared his house with his daughter Virginia and with some other employees. And all of a sudden, a series of murders started to happen, including in Dr. Kessler's own house, and it was never clear who was the real murderer. Virginia, she had a boyfriend called Ralph, and they liked each other very much. However, what Virginia didn't know is that Ralph, before dating her, he had also dated the maid of the house called Cecil. And when Cecil saw him visiting Virginia, she confronted him in the backyard, saying that she wouldn't allow him to marry Virginia, that she would be a good wife to him, that Ralph should reconsider, leave Virginia, and stay with her. However, the butler of the house overheard the entire conversation because he was in the backyard with the car of Dr. Kessler, putting it in the garage, and he overheard the conversation. But he remained quiet. The problem is that in that same night, Cecile was murdered. The employees of Dr. Kessler, they lived in the mansion and consequently they slept there. And in that same night, the maid was murdered. At first, the butler was quiet, but after a while, when the police asked him, he confessed everything that he overheard. And then, of course, that Ralph became the main suspect for her murder. And he ended up being arrested. Dr. Kessler hired an excellent lawyer to him. They did, Dr. Kessler and Virginia, they did all they could to save Ralph, but he was arrested, judged, and unfortunately, he was condemned to a death sentence, and it was impossible to prove his innocence. However, even after Ralph's death, the mysterious murders continued happening. And one of those murders was the gardener, who was murdered in the kitchen of the mansion. And of course, the police was called. And we must notice that Ralph, although the Dr. Kessler and Virginia didn't know, Ralph had a twin brother called Paul, who joined the family, and stayed in the mansion overnight for a while. So the police was called, and they tried to investigate all the possibilities. And one of the policemen, after some days, he realized that Dr. Kessler's wife was wandering in the garden. So he caught her and he showed her for everyone to see. And as soon as Dr. Kessler saw his wife, he became immediately homicidal and tried to kill the first person who was in front of him. And the first person who was in front of him was a policeman. So there were witnesses, Virginia, Paul, the other policemen, the employees of the mansion. They saw that he tried to kill the policeman, because Dr. Kessler, as soon as he saw his wife, he became in a kind of trance state and he couldn't control his homicidal impulses. Then it became clear who was the murderer all along, and all of a sudden, when the police was talking to his wife, she fell dead on the floor for any reason that we don't know. And this is how the film ended. And it's a very short film. It lasts a bit over 1 hour. The plot clearly has some faults. The film sometimes is too short. It lacks development and depth in the characters. It's a kind of low-budget film, but there are problems with the script. And even though Lugosi's acting was often exaggerated, it's not a big deal. But we don't know exactly the reasons behind the characters' attitudes. We don't know why Dr. Kessler was in a kind of trance whenever he saw his wife. We have no idea why it proved to be so impossible to prove Ralph's innocence and prevent her from being in the death row. It is also unclear why the police didn't act in the beginning when the first murder happened, and why the police only interfered in a more forceful way when many murders have already happened. And it's unclear why Virginia accepted so passively that even though there were many murders in the house, they didn't move out. It was a healthy family. They could afford to go to another house. And this thing of the Paul being the twin brother of Ralph, it was something a bit shallow, because how come they didn't know that Ralph had a twin brother? How come they didn't know Ralph's family? However, even though the film does have obvious faults in the plot, it is produced with the typical horror cliches. Bela Lugosi by himself is a classic. It's a kind of horror film that doesn't scare people very much. So it's entertaining. It's not something aggressive to see. It's more on the silly side. So despite all facts, it remains interesting, even though the film really seems to be aging. That's all for now, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you!